Hello everyone and welcome to the Rift. So, you want to learn how to play Viktor? Well, that's great because I've got just the video for you. Today, I'll be taking you from a Viktor 0 to a Viktor hero. We'll be going over key cards in the deck, important rulings to understand when you're playing, some different builds that the deck tends to run, the deck's overall general game plan that it wants to accomplish each game, the deck's strengths and its weaknesses, its overall power level and where I think it lands in the metagame, its matchups. We'll be diving into each one and talking about what the deck does well in them and what you should look out for. Then we'll cap things off with an overall ranking of the deck in the game's current metagame with a small discussion on the deck's matchup spread and what I think about the deck overall. But first, if you're enjoying this content, make sure that you like the video, and if you're feeling spicy, make sure that you smash that subscribe button just as hard as you'd smash your favorite League of Legends character. Alright, let's start by going over the deck's general game plan. I think this deck is pretty simple to understand. You just put bodies on the board, buff them up, win combat, and then eventually take enough points to win the game. This is the strongest deck, so you really don't have to get creative or do anything crazy with it. You can kind of just play out a general strategy that Riftbound wants you to play, and you'll probably get there with this deck. The only thing this deck really does that's unique is make tokens. You have these one might tokens that you can make a bunch of ways and then use them for various things. You can use them to just take battlefields by themselves. That's a pretty good early game play. They can take battlefields mid to late game as well if you pump them up with cards like Siphon Power or Stratagem. You can also use them as sacrifice fodder to play cards like Cold a Week and Hidden Blade for essentially free. Your Legend's effect only being 1 mana to activate is really good because a lot of turns in the game you'll just have 1 mana left over with nothing else to really do with it besides just make a token. It allows you to just not waste mana, and you'll probably be using this effect a lot over the course of a game. Maybe not every turn, but probably pretty close to it. I think this deck's main gameplay pattern that you'll be playing out in most games is to just play a very basic, straightforward game. Since it is the best deck, you really don't have to do anything fancy. You can just rely mostly on your fundamentals and skills as a trading card game player in general, and your overall knowledge and experience with the game as a whole. I think this deck scales very well with the caliber of player that you are, as well as if your opponent's playing it. There's really nothing fancy that you need to do with this deck. I think as long as you're a good player in general, this deck will really click with you and really resonate with what you want to do with the deck. Talking about the deck's strengths, I think it has quite a lot because, as I've said previously, it is currently the best deck in the game. I think pretty much every single card in this deck has a lot of strengths. Your cheap units are pretty good early game, Watchful Sentry and Soaring Scout. Sometimes you can play down Faithful Manufacturer or Vanguard Captain turn 1 as well. They're all very good early game plays. If you're going first and you play down Watchful Sentry or Soaring Scout, next turn you can just take a battlefield, which is really good. And even if you don't happen to draw those cards, you can still use Viktor's Legend effect to make a token and do the same thing. It's not as good, of course, because a token's not as good as an actual card that does something, but it's still good enough to get you a point. If you're going first and you have 3 mana available from Obelisk of Power, Faithful Manufacturer is an excellent play. Same with Vanguard Captain if you can combo it with Seal of Unity, because if you play one of those cards down turn 1, you get 2 guys on the battlefield. You get the guy you play and the token as well, which would potentially allow you to take 2 battlefields and score 2 points next turn, which is very good. I think overall all of the units in this deck are very solid. They're all either good or great. None of them really feel outstanding or too strong. They're just always solid. They're pretty much just good most of the time. They're very consistent in their performance, which I think is a big reason as to why this deck is so strong. Most of the time it's going to be a very consistent deck unless lets you brick, unfortunately, drawing a lot of your high cost cards in the early to mid game. That can be kind of unfortunate, but you aren't playing that many of them, only 3 Harness Dragon and 3 Grand Stratagem that you really don't want to see until the late game or the mid game. So if you ever draw them in your opening hand, those are easy mulligans. Unless the rest of your hand is good enough to get you to the mid to late game, then you may want to consider keeping them, because they are very good cards and very strong win conditions in the late game. So mulliganing one away and then just not drawing into any others can kind of feel bad sometimes. It really just depends on your opening hand and the matchup as to whether you want to mulligan them or not. Like most decks, mulligans with this deck can feel very matchup dependent. Cold a week, especially if you're playing a mirror match, it's kind of useless. You're gonna kill your own token for one of their tokens. That kind of just doesn't do anything. I'd say pretty much every other card is really good in the mirror match though. And there aren't really scenarios against other decks where any card in your deck is really bad. They're kind of just all good always. So it really just depends on your opening hand what you want to mulligan. You want a nice mix of early game and mid game units plus maybe an interactive spell or two. There's not really a card that you would generally want to hard mulligan for. Usually when you're hard mulliganing for a card with this deck, it's going to be matchup dependent on which card you really want to see. So I'll explain more of that later when we talk about actual matchups. Talking more specifically about your mid to late game units, I think Cruel Patron is just a decent card. Killing one of your tokens basically makes this a 4-drop 5 might, which is decently overstated. It doesn't really do anything else unless you have your Viktor champion on the board, in which case you'll generate another token when the one you kill dies, which is pretty good. The 6 might on it means that it's out of rocket range against Jinx, which is very good. That card can kind of give you some trouble in that matchup. Other than that, it doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of a big body that's annoying to deal with. Harness Dragon is kind of the same, but it has the added benefit of killing anything anywhere, which is very strong. There aren't many ways of killing things in your opponent's base in the game right now, so having access to that effect in this deck is just another added benefit on top of all the ones it already has. It's also a decently standard body at 6 might, so again, it doesn't die to rocket. It's just a very good unit all around. Never really feels bad, never really feels too crazy either. It's just always very strong. Again, another card that's just consistently good. Machine Evangel may not seem that strong at first, but playtesting with this card has proven that it's pretty good. Having 4 might is just enough to where it feels really bad if you're just trading with it, because you feel like you haven't really accomplished anything. They still get 3 tokens, which for Viktor sometimes is just even better than having one guy that's 4 might because of cards like Siphon Power or Stratagem or even Trifarian. So I think this card is deceptively pretty strong. It gets you a ton of value over the course of 2 turns instead of just being a big guy for 1 turn, if that kind of makes sense. Paying 5 for a guy that's 4 might doesn't seem that great on the surface. Kind of seems like you're not really getting what you paid for, which you aren't initially, but when it dies, you get some extra stuff. So after it dies and you get the tokens, you feel like you've gotten more than you've paid for, which you have. Sometimes, sure, this card can feel a little bit too slow, but I think in most games, if you get this guy down onto the board in time, he's just gonna be really good. Alright, let's talk about the spells now, which I think are definitely the strongest cards in this deck, and probably some of the strongest cards in the entire game. Hidden Blade especially, I think is probably the strongest card in the game currently. It can kill literally anything, no matter how big it is. It's difficult to deal with because if they just try and kill the guy on the battlefield that this card is hidden on, you can just chain this card and draw 2 cards, and they've done kind of nothing. This card, in my opinion, is criminally undercosted for what it can do. Being able to either just draw 2 cards by killing a token or kill any unit in the game that's trying to threaten to take a battlefield for only a single power is crazy. And even just weighing this card down from your hand for 2 and a power is still really good because it can just kill anything. Or if you're in a pinch, you can just play it from your hand to try and draw 2 cards. This card's extremely versatile, and every way you can use it is really good. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this card gets changed when the game actually comes out, because honestly it probably needs to be changed. It's just a little bit too strong, a little bit stronger than all the other spells in the game, I'd say. Another card that's probably too strong is Grand Stratagem. I think this card is also a bit undercosted for what it can do. +5 might to everything you have is crazy. It's an extremely reliable win condition when you're at 6 points. You can just slam this down, pump your guys, and then your opponent probably won't be able to contest how much might you have. Playing this as an action as well is also pretty good. It allows you to hold battlefields a lot easier. That's not what you're going to be using it for most of the time probably, but it is definitely an option to keep in mind. Cold a Week is also a very strong removal spell. It's a lot worse when your opponent can make a token, so you definitely want to keep that in mind, but if they don't have tokens on their board, then this card is usually just very good. It's especially very good against low unit count decks like Yasuo or Ramp Volibear. Those decks just kind of hard lose to this card, and it's even decent against Jinx. Yeah, they play a lot of cheap units, but trading 1-for-1 with a cheaper unit is still probably pretty good in most scenarios, and trading with one of their larger units is definitely worth it. Stupefy most of the time doesn't really do much. It's kind of just 1 mana to draw a card, which is still pretty good. When it actually wins you a combat, of course it feels amazing, but that doesn't actually happen as often as you think it would. If you have multiple of them in your hand, then you can do that more consistently, but with just one of them, pinging something for 1 bite really isn't that impactful. It's still a very good card though overall. Siphon Power is just a better version of Stupefy. It's a very strong combat trick, maybe the strongest combat trick in the game right now. It's a very good tool to bluff your opponent with as well. Just having 2 runes readied on your field is potentially very threatening. You may not even have this card in your hand, but the potential threat of this card winning combat against someone may make them play suboptimally. Yet another card in the deck that just gets better the more skilled of a player you are. So in terms of overall strengths of the deck, I think you just have a very consistent, solid game plan that is going to work for you most of the time. The deck is pretty easy to pick up and play outside of understanding general TCG fundamentals and understanding the game as a whole. I think it has the best spread of spells of any deck in the game right now, and its spread of units is very good as well. It's arguable which deck has the best spread of units in the game right now. I think they're pretty even overall. Each deck has some pretty good units in it. Talking about weaknesses of the deck, it can be a little bit slower to start in the early game. It really only plays down tokens and things with 1 might on turn 1, which obviously get contested pretty hard by units with 2 or more might. They'll force you to either trade unfavorably or spend a combat trick to try and punch over their unit. So it may take you a little bit of time to really accrue a big board of guys that's really threatening and can start winning the game sometimes, especially when you're going second. I think going first with this deck is very strong, and going second is just good. Losing out on the tempo advantage with this deck can feel pretty bad sometimes, especially in the mirror match, where it's even more of just an evenly matched race to try and get to 8 points as fast as possible. So going second against a deck like Jinx, I think this deck can struggle a little bit, and against aggro volley too, if they draw well enough, it can struggle too. Other than that, I don't really think there's a scenario, generally speaking, where this deck can struggle. Going first, you definitely should be at least even or winning against every deck in the game, and you have Obelisk of Power in the deck to make going first a little bit easier, even easier. As far as other weaknesses go, there aren't really any. It's pretty much just the weaknesses of every deck in the game right now. You can just brick on too many cards that you can't lay, or just not draw the right cards that you need, which is just gonna happen in any TCG really. Variance is just variance. It is what it is. So I've said it before, but I'll formally say it again now. I think the overall power level of this deck is great. It's currently the best deck in the game. In terms of matchup spread across the format right now, it currently has only winning or even matchups. There really isn't a deck that can consistently win against this deck. I still don't think that's really a problem though, at least right now. Games feel still pretty even and still pretty good to play with this deck against like Jinx and aggro Volibear. So I think those matchups are pretty even, and I definitely wouldn't call this deck tier 0. It's not even close. The deck is notably better than everything else in the game right now, but not too much, I'd say. I think individual cards in this deck are probably too good, but the deck itself is probably fine. Alright, let's talk about some specific rulings that are pretty important to know. Probably the simplest to understand is that Legion doesn't trigger from your Legend's ability to make a token. Tokens don't technically count as real cards, so if you just play a token from your Legends effect, you don't technically count as having played another card during the turn, so Legion doesn't do anything. Another thing to note with Legion is that if you play a card and it gets countered by a counterspell, that card does not count as being played. So if you try to play a card, it gets countered, and then you try to play a card with Legion, you don't get the Legion effect because you haven't technically played a card during the turn yet. It got countered, it went poof, it doesn't count. Something to know with Cull is that it doesn't target, and both players pick their units after the card resolves, not at the point at which the card is played from the hand. Also, whoever played Cull has to pick which unit they kill first, and then the other players do, in order of priority if you're playing in a free-for-all or 2v2 game. Since it doesn't target, it doesn't trigger abilities like Deflect. It also gets around things that say they can't be chosen, which I don't think we have in the game right now, but if we ever do, then this card gets around that. Something to know with Hidden Blade and hidden cards in general, I guess. You only have one right now, but it's still important to know for the future too. If Hidden Blade is hidden at a battlefield, it can only kill something at that battlefield. So if your opponent attacks the other battlefield, you can't use Hidden Blade to kill the thing at the other battlefield. It just doesn't work like that. Of course, if you just play this card straight from your hand, you can kill anything at either battlefield, but when this card is actually hidden face down, it does restrict you. Also, something important to know is that the unit that Hidden Blade is targeting has to stay on the board for Hidden Blade to kill it in order for Hidden Blade to actually draw its controllers any cards. Going over some builds with this deck, there's really only two. We don't have very many blue cards right now. There is a version of the deck that runs some blue runes and some cards that use blue runes, but it isn't as good as the yellow version. It's just strictly worse, so I don't really think it's worth talking about it that much, at least in terms of 1v1. In multiplayer games, it might be a little bit better because games are slower. You can draw a bunch of cards with rank, and that might be worth it, but in terms of 1v1, the blue cards that require blue runes just aren't worth running. So for the build that people actually play that's good, you only run yellow runes, and you pretty much just play 3 copies of all the cards that are good, and then 1 copy of Viktor. So you really don't want to draw multiple of him. He's really only a card you're going to be playing when you don't have anything better to do. He's still a very good card. I just think it's not worth it playing more copies when you already have access to him all the time. You really don't want to play 2 of him in a game. Just 1 is enough. In terms of battlefields, we're playing Trifarian, Obelisk, and Grand Plaza. Usually what you want to do is just play Trifarian down in game 1. It's your best battlefield, and it's very good against every deck that isn't the mirror match. In the mirror match, it doesn't really do anything, but for every other matchup, it's definitely the best battlefield that you have access to. You play it down game 1, which helps you win game 1 a lot. People tend to play down their strongest battlefield most of the time, so you really want to do the same to contend with that. It just helps you secure game 1 a lot more often, so most of the time I think you'll be winning game 1. After you do so, you want to put down Grand Plaza. The effect basically never happens, so don't even worry about it. This battlefield is basically just blank. The idea of playing this field is to not give your opponent any advantages over you, because you probably know they're gonna go first, since the player who loses game 1 gets to choose who goes first and second in game 2. Typically the player who gets to go first is gonna benefit more from battlefields than the player who went second. Usually you get to go to the battlefields first before before the player who's going second, so you get the benefit of the field before them, which is why you just don't want to give them any benefits. If you win game 1, whatever happens in game 2 really doesn't matter, because game 3 you get to go first with Obelisk of Power, which means you should have a pretty big advantage. Getting to go first with 3 mana is really good in this deck, so overall, game 1 and game 3 you should be favored in. That's the ideal game plan anyway. Obviously it doesn't always pan out that way. If you lose game 1 with Trifurion, then you'll want to go first with Obelisk in game 2 to most likely secure the win there, and then game 3 is just a normal game. Grand Plaza doesn't do anything, and your opponent's most likely going to be using one of their weaker battlefields as well, so you'll be on a little bit of a back foot going second, but other than that, it should just be fine. Just a normal game. Alright, let's talk about matchup spreads now. Viktor has a very good matchup spread, probably the best in the game. He's either winning or even into everything on this list here. Against the other decks in A tier, I think it's a pretty close matchup with both of them. Against Jinx, I think it's about even. If Jinx gets to go first, Jinx should be in a favorable position, and if Viktor gets to go first, Viktor should be in a favorable position. I think Jinx and Volibear as well should be playing Altar to Unity. I think that battlefield's very strong against Viktor, and if you're not playing it, I think the matchup gets a bit worse for you if you're playing Jinx or Voli. Having some protection against Cull is super important. That card can really shut you down sometimes and just prevent you from being able to do much at all. It depends on the scenario, but if you ever pass your turn with just one unit on the field, it's in danger of getting culled, which obviously isn't good because that ruins a lot of your tempo. Against aggro Voli, I think it just depends on how good of a curve Volibear draws. If they draw a good curve, they start the game with cheap units, and then in the mid to late game, they draw a bunch of good expensive units and removal spells as well. I think the matchup should be favored towards Volibear if that happens. But if Volibear draws a sub-average curve, then the matchup should just go to Viktor. When Volibear draws an average curve, or just draws average in general, I'm a lot more iffy on which way the matchup is going to skew. I think it should be about even theoretically, but it might be slightly favored towards Viktor, especially if Volibear isn't playing Altar to Unity, which I definitely think they should be. That card is very good for that deck. Against everything in B tier, I think Viktor should just have a winning matchup. Against mid-range Yasuo, that's really the only one Viktor can sometimes struggle against. I think that matchup really just comes down to how many removal spells you draw and how many counter spells your opponent draws. If they draw a lot of cheap counter spells, you're probably going to have a hard time because they'll be able to stick Yasuo on their field and start killing units back to back, which isn't good for you. Pretty much all of your units can be killed with Yasuo's attack trigger. I think drawing Harness Dragon is really crucial in this matchup because they have no way of stopping it from killing Yasuo. So if you don't draw that card, you're probably going to have a rough time against Yasuo, which if you do, then the matchup should go your way. Against combo Jinx, you should just be winning. I think that deck is a bit too slow to be able to contend with you on average and loses a bit too hard to removal because it relies more on sticking purple Jinx on the field and untapping with it next turn to combo off, and that strategy loses pretty hard to things like Cull and Harness Dragon. Control Yasuo really just doesn't have the early game pressure or the unit count necessary to really play the game much against Viktor. Harness Dragon just really screws you over even more in this matchup, so Viktor should just win most of the time against this deck. And against the decks in C tier, I think obviously Viktor just wins. Mono green Yasuo really isn't strong enough to be able to contend with Viktor. It's just not that strong of a deck overall. There's just strictly better options you could be playing. And Ramp Volley really loses hard to all of your removal spells in the deck. It loses super hard to Cull, to Hidden Blade, to Harness Dragon, and there's really nothing Volibear can do about those cards. They don't have any kind of reaction spell that protects their units or really any way to protect anything they have except the cards with Deflect, which isn't really any form of protection. It just sort of dissuades your opponent from killing your stuff a little bit, but they're still just going to kill it anyway because it doesn't matter. And Cull even gets around Deflect, so you have literally nothing you can do against that card. Overall, I think this deck is very strong. Definitely the best in the game, though I don't think by that much. The other decks I put in A tier can give it a good run for its money most of the time, and it's a very skill-based deck most games. In a decently skill-based game, I'd say say. I think Riftbound has a lot of skill expression already. Obviously, there are going to be some games where you just draw well and your opponent doesn't, or where your opponent draws well and you just don't. And in those games, players really aren't going to have too much agency, but I think in the majority of games, you're just going to draw a hand that's about average, and it's going to come down to things like battlefield choice, deck building choices, decision making, and how you attack and allocate your resources and use your cards. Alright, I think that's enough rambling for today. Thank you guys for watching and sticking with my content, and yeah, that's all I gotta say. Take care.